I put the subtitles on the top because I used to live in Minnesota, and I learned from going to concerts that everyone is always taller than you here. The subtitles might also be a bit slow because of the internet, but yeah. Okay, so in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about a very sort of streamlined, straightforward redistricting process. If you haven't done a redistricting project before, you might find yourself embroiled in one in 9 or 10 years from now, because that's the cadence that the census releases, and you might be in a different job then. I'm going to talk about some lessons we learned. I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to talk about some of the tools we used. Also up here is the name of Aaron Hamilton, also on my team, the GIS team at TriMet. Aaron helped with this project. We split up the tasks. Totally invaluable. Couldn't have done it without her. So this is the TriMet system. It's similar size to Minneapolis's transit system. We have 5 light rail lines, 1 commuter rail line, about 82 bus lines. During peak hours, we have about 500 vehicles in service, over 6,000 stops, and over 3,000 employees. A lot of visitors to Portland remark about how close our light rail platform is to the airport when they get out of the airport. I measured this out from Alaska Airlines Gate B3 at PDX. It is a 2-minute walk to our light rail stop. From there, it's just a short ride into downtown, hop off at a stop downtown, and then it is only a 3-minute walk to world-famous Voodoo Donuts. Unfortunately, if you add up that walking time, it only equals up enough calories to account for 1/10 of one Voodoo Donut. So pros and cons to this convenient stop spacing here. Anyway, on to this redistricting project for our board of directors. In January of this year, Aaron and I got a flurry of emails from TriMet management, a little bit confused tone about redistricting. And the reason why is because in the previous decade, the Oregon Secretary of State just did it for transit agencies. They had like consultants or internal employees, and they just did it, and they said, here are your new transit districts. This year they decided, we don't want to do that. Why don't you guys do it for yourselves? So they said, you have to do it yourselves. Look up how to do it. Our particular board of directors, it is not elected. It's not like a popular election like in some other transit districts. They are simply appointed by the governor of Oregon. They set policy, enact legislation, they review contracts, sign very big budget items, that kind of thing. So Aaron and I dug around and found the hard requirements for drawing districts, and this is about it. I'm going to go through each little requirement here. Each district, as nearly as practicable, is contiguous, is of equal population, I can work with that, utilizes existing geographic or political boundaries, a little tougher, but out west where you actually have topography, it's a little more apparent. Do not divide communities of interest, this one's real fuzzy, and is connected by transportation links, which we actually know how to look at that, so that's good. Then there's one more fuzzy requirement at the end, is consistent with the diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility values of the Secretary of State as outlined in the agency's mission, vision, and values. If you go to their vision, mission, and values website, it doesn't actually list any of these values. It just says we have them, we have these values. So this wasn't very helpful to us. Luckily at TriMet, we also internalize these values and are way more specific with them. So we actually have like tools to look at this, like we understand it, we do it in like every step of GIS analysis we do. We dug around in our old files to see what had been done by the contractor, the Secretary of State, 10 years before. We found an old PDF map. We had an old shapefile that we'd been using for the last 10 years. This was the most helpful thing, a little text file that had GeoIDs for each census block and what district it belonged to. That basically told us everything we needed to know about how to do this. And then good old readme.txt. You can chuckle all you want, but every single person in this room has done documentation this way before. It's better than nothing. It was pretty good. It was okay. I don't mind. So we had some hints. We figured out the methodology. We got in touch with our contacts at other transit agencies in Oregon to ask anyone who remained how they did it 10 years ago. And it was basically something like, you'll be fine. If you do anything wrong, the public will let you know. So that's always fun. Again, these aren't like political districts, so they also told us, like, honestly, the amount of public engagement with this will be like really quiet. I'll talk about the public engagement later. It was pretty low level and thankfully just not really a big deal for our districts. So we had our old districts, we had old census data from 2010, we had old population values for each block from that census. We have the new Census 2020 data, which doesn't have the absolute full landscape of data values yet, but it had population and a few other things that we needed. So as far as redistricting goes, ours is quite easy. We just basically have to have equal population, follow these general geographic boundaries, and be smart and have common sense about how you draw these things. So a lot of things to get right though. We started looking around at different software options. There's Esri Redistricting, both desktop and online versions, District Builder, Districtor. There are just so many web apps by the nerdiest people on earth who make these kinds of things. Well, cartographers, but honestly, it's like math guys. But some of the issues with these doesn't always have the latest census data because they made it 5 years ago for some other election and they don't maintain it anymore. Doesn't always have block level data because it doesn't fit into their little web app. It doesn't understand custom boundaries like our transit district, which doesn't really respect county or city boundaries. It's like its own customized thing. And we kind of needed to get started with this right away. We had like 2 weeks to do this. And if you ever worked in the public sector, like you can't even get a contract for like software done that fast. So that was kind of limiting. But then we realized we were doing all the scratch work for our whole project in QGIS. We kind of converted ourselves to QGIS at TriMet. We use Esri stuff very little. And then we realized, like, hey, with like a few more steps, we can just kind of do all this already. Like we're 90% of the way there. So it wasn't much of a leap to go to our fully functional redistricting environment. Aaron and I split up some work and said, hey, let's each create a few different scenarios. Like, let's do this kind of in isolation and see what we come up with. Pretty simple workflow. We had our own little shape files of census blocks. You can just select blocks that you want to shift to another district. You can batch assign them to a different district, just in the regular edit mode attribute table. I created a virtual layer in QGIS that, like live, it sums up the population of all the blocks. And so it's that little pane in the upper right-hand corner. It'll just show you live, like, what's the population of each district. So you can play a little whack-a-mole and get them all to get approximately equal population. Like, this is honestly all we really needed, and it worked great. One quick note, when you're redistricting, always double check that your board district members are inside their new differently shaped districts. It sounds like kind of obvious, but very recently and kind of infamously, this happened in the San Francisco Bay Area. BART, it has elected board districts, and one of their board district members was moving her residence. It was like kind of on the edge of the district, so she asked the transit agency, hey, am I going to be in the new district? And they said, oh yeah, you'll be fine. And then a few months later, they were like, oh, actually you're not in the district anymore. Sorry, like you're off the board. Which is like not good because like they're elected. It was a huge debacle. Basically, it kind of got around this, like BART screwed up. You can't actually, this got reversed, and so dubiously happy ending, definitely happy for the board, but you can't really like change your districts. Like the GIS person, you can't go in and change your districts for a popularly elected person while they're sitting there already. Like, can you imagine? Like that's like, it's like live gerrymandering basically. So always double check. And luckily all our board members are like in the middle of their districts, so this is not as much of an issue. Okay, so we developed 3 separate scenarios in the end, balancing kind of district shape and equal population in sort of different ways. The TriMet management decided to play it super safe, and they just wanted the one that was closest to equal population as possible. Not really the smoothest one, but whatever, I get their reasoning. So they decided on this scenario 3 here. Aaron put together some really awesome leaflet web maps. You can highlight the areas where we significantly changed the district geometry. You can see the population tables. For public outreach, our writer communication team did the lead on this. They're fantastic. News releases, social media posts, virtual open houses. We noticed, I think we got 12, 15 comments in total. It's so little. And we noticed that 6 or 7 of them had this suspiciously similar language in it. It was all kind of saying the same thing. And it was these people in one particular little tiny suburb who were outraged that they were in the same district as downtown Portland. And so this language was all the same, so I just Googled it. It was their neighborhood newspaper had picked it up and said, email TriMet and tell them you don't want to be in the same district as downtown Portland. So it's valid feedback. We take it into account. We don't necessarily have to do what they ask for, but we do take it into account. It's valid. This happens. It was a good lesson for us. So we submitted our scenarios, big package of files. A few months later, we got this fancy letter from the Oregon Secretary of State saying, congratulations. There's actually a phrase in there please consider putting together documentation so that people know how to do this 10 years from now. So that's a clever thing from a political office, I guess. Political people usually can't think on that time horizon. So, all right, so lessons learned. Back on that, documentation. Think about how you're going to make documentation for 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I noticed I didn't list any answers here. I just said, think about it. Please, please, please use, if you can, open data, open workflows, document this stuff. It's good for reproducibility for the person who does it in 10 years. It's good for public accountability and transparency if you have to follow that. Commercial software might not be needed. It might not be what you need. It might not be suitable. You might be using something free that's way better. I could be wrong. There might be a commercial solution that's perfect for you. But don't assume that you'll have to pay money for some closed source thing to do this. And you are in control. To your horror and dismay, you cartographers are the people who do redistricting. You hear about it in the news and it's the politicians created the maps. It's no, some poor GIS analyst in a basement created the maps. And they're the one who does all this. And if they're feeling really sneaky, they could just do whatever they want. You're in control. It's kind of awesome though. So this says questions, but sneakily, it's not necessarily your questions for me. I'm going to sort of propose some questions to you. I'll be on the Slack. Maybe we can discuss some of this stuff. But I want to ask things like, what are the implications of building your new districts kind of on the bones of the old districts? How do we document processes for 10 years in the future? It's like it's like reading about what symbols do we put on these nuclear waste areas so people 10,000 years from now will know to avoid them, that kind of thing, but in the GIS world. And what is the role of the cartographer in drawing districts? Because, again, surprise, you're the ones who do it. What are the implications of us being the ones who do it? So this is my contact info, my GIS team's contact info, and our website where you can access our API and download our GIS data. So thank you.